All right. Okay, let's dive right into it. So I'm not going to give any instructions here, but most of you know me and most of you know what we are doing here today. So we will look a little bit at ontology releases and how they generally work, and discuss some of the general problems and their workarounds, and what yeah, hopefully we can go through some of the specific examples. So in the obo training Slack, I shared some associations between some of you and some ontologies, and we will check whether we can run releases for each of these as part of the session as well. But before we go into all of this, I want to go through some very basic things about repository structure that you need to understand in order to understand how releases generally work, and about various alternative architectures here. So most of you know the Ontology Development Kit, or ODK, which basically, for at least the repository generation functionality of the ODK, which we are not discussing today, which will generate a specific repo structure from scratch. So for example, given a kind of small configuration file, what it will do is it will create a bunch of boilerplate files and directory structures. So, you know, this is again not about the topic today, but given this configuration file here, you run the ODK generation process, and it will
Nico,
give you.
You're not sharing your screen, if that's what your intent is.
That was my intent. I thought I was. What happened? Sorry. So yeah, so in the Pato directory. So this is the configuration file. We will discuss it in another session a bit more detail, but given such a configuration where you say things like, these are the things I want to import, this is the documentation system I want to use, this is the name, this is the GitHub repository, the ODK will generate a file structure, which is basically like a bunch of directories, such as the infamous src or source and ontology directories, a bunch of files like the edit files, the ID range files, the catalog files, and a few other files that are automatically generated. And yeah, and basically, which then altogether constitute what we would call like the repository layout for an ontology repository. And the key kind of technological framework that we are using for that, you know, drives all of our release and all our other data transformation pipelines is a combination of make and makefiles and robot commands mostly. So again, this is not a make tutorial, but you should basically know as a release expert that all the logic that you need to look for when things break and anything that happens is encoded in these make files. And these make files, what they are in a very simplified essence, what they actually are is like they define a bunch of files. Let me just find one that is very clear to you, like this one here. So define a bunch of files like for example, the base ontology release, which some of you have seen, and then provide a recipe of how this file should be generated. So the typical make goal has a name, which is often or most of the time a file, a set of dependencies, which is the things or the files that need to be created before this recipe can be executed, and then the recipe itself. So in this case, for example, make you say, I want to generate the file base.obo. You tell make, in order to generate base.obo, please first generate base.owl, for which there's another recipe somewhere. And then when you have the base.owl, you take it using robot and convert it into obo format, and you do some other shenanigans and end up with this base file here. So ont here in this case is the Pato variable, so it would be Pato minus base.obo. So kind of that's the essence of it. This is not a tutorial about make. We will have that. We will cover this. We will go into much more depth in one of the courses in the future. But for now, you need to just know there is a place, which is the make file, which defines all of our release artifacts and our imports and so on. And in there, it has the recipes of how they are generated. And sometimes you need to look in here and to debug. It's the other thing that's important is that this make file is actually a make file that is generated automatically by the ODK, so it should not be overwritten. But all the ODK repositories at least also have like another make file, which is ontology id.makefile. At least most of the ones that are here that we are talking about today, they have that. I think apart from RO, everything has it. And you can see that in there you can override and extend some of the stuff in the main makefile. So anything you put in here will basically override what you have in the main makefile. So an example in Pato, at some point it was decided for one reason or another that I don't know now, that the main obo release should not be the typical obo release, which is this like full release, or it should just not be generated directly from the ont.owl file. But we want instead to use the Pato simple artifact. And then we do a bit more processing here because we have to also change the ontology IRI. And then, so what happens here is that for our release, when the pato.obo is created, we are using a different dependency. So all that's good. So this is a small make file for those that are lucky enough, like Megan, I don't know whether she's here, that work with Uberon. Uberon has a make file, an extended make file that is more than 1,500 lines long, and there's many problems and many like complexities in there that if you have to debug them, you need to have a lot of patience and yeah, a bit of technological background, I think. Okay, so structure is this. That's the make file. Now, most of you have actually run stuff using the ontology development kit, so the actual Docker container that contains all our tools. If you look inside of the various repositories, you see, for example, that there is this file run.sh, and in some cases also run.bat, which is the equivalent for Windows, and which are what we call Odk Wrapper Scripts. And these wrapper scripts, basically what they do, they just do exactly that. They have a bunch of boilerplate code that wrap a call to the Docker container that contains the ODK tooling, and then you basically run all your commands inside of that Docker container. So if you were to run sh run.sh and then make prepare release, then the entire make pipeline that is defined in our make files here would be executed inside of the ODK Docker container. Okay. So much for the kind of like basic structure. We will discuss this in a future session in more depth because there's a lot of like intricacies here. But the main thing is here, you should think is, okay, there is a fixed repository structure that the ODK knows about and the make file is dependent on, which looks like this, like so some files, some folders. There are some files that have some functional code, and there's a file where you can actually extend stuff. And we will come back to this towards the end of the session when we are talking about debugging problems. Okay, so that much for the basic overview of the repository structure. I want to also point out that while I am kind of, I've been pushing ODK repo structures widely, and you will see them almost everywhere popping up. You will also have other kind of very good structures that are not ODK. For example, if you look at the way that OBI does their structure, you will it will look a little bit similar. You see you have a source directory, you have the Sparkle directory, a scripts directory, an ontology directory. So all the kind of things that we also have in the typical ODK layout. ob-edit.owl, again, typical, but you don't see a makefile in here because OB chose to keep the makefile at the top level of the repository, for example. There's also not kind of like a managed part, an ODK managed part and a manual part. So if you wanted to change something, it would be all in here. But in the kind of like essence, it's doing the same thing. So it's defining, again, the files that are necessary for the release. It explains how they should be generated, and then add some command to bulk generate all the artifacts that are necessary for each release. So it's kind of similar, but slightly different in structure, which if you know the one, you will be able to maintain the other as well. Okay, so there are some pipelines that are kind of like partially mistakes, partially due to complexity, completely different. Like, for example, the Eufino pipeline, because it's not about actually integrate. It's not about like maintaining in the same way ontologies as in most of the other ontologies that we are working in, but it's actually like an ontology that is derived from other ontologies. It's basically a set of Python scripts, and this is something that I will teach to Ray separately, but it does have some kind of like make commands to build it as well, but it's a bit completely different, unfortunately, than the rest of the things. All right, so now let's move over to the, so first of all, so far, are there any kind of questions about what we've said so far, or are we ready to dive into the release process? Great. Okay, so release process, as I've primed many of you in previous meetings, the thing that we all have to think every day when we wake up and go to sleep is document. Tardy in the last years with documenting our processes in a very nice centralized fashion. So what we want, so documentation will go into two major buckets. One is what we would call the ontology, let's say, editors documentation. This ontology editors documentation, and I'm not going to talk about this now because that's not the topic of this session, contains everything that you need to know in order to, contribute to an ontology, run the releases of an ontology, and so on and so on. You can, and in here, you can find, for example, the description of the release workflow. This is the Pato documentation, and we have the same for CL, but we don't have the same for example, for Uberon and some of the other ontologies. So for these, we still need to create something like that. And this has an exact set instructions of how you should run the release. So even if you forget everything that I say now and you don't want to watch the video again, you can step by step go through this process here. I know that Sean, for example, has done this a few times, but I say this also to you again, that if you find any kind of like weirdnesses and inconsistencies with this, the documentation is published for each of the ontologies separately, but it's maintained in a centralized place. So if you were to have suggestions on how this documentation should be changed, then you would make a pull request in the ontology development kit in the dynamic template. And you will see there, this is like, it's a bit weird to get used to this, but you will see the release workflow MD section, and then you can make changes here or make suggestions there if something is unclear. Again, it's really important that we get our documentation super straight and super unambiguous. So if you have suggestions, just make them. And remember that if if yeah, and that's it. So the goal being creating good documentation for all of the ontologies. Now, I said before, there are 2 bins of documentation. So there's this one bin, which is like the ontology-centric documentation, and there is this other bin, which some of us are building at the moment in the as part of this obo training system, which is this, I don't have it open now here, but somewhere you know about this. Is like this kind of obook or obo training website, which James Overton, Becky Jackson, and Nicole and I have started, but which I hope you will all contribute to. This one is more centric for like things like tutorials, how do you do things, more like lesson centric, and it's more like a central place to organize training and know-how for ontologies. However, you will see these kind of 2 concepts of ontology documentation and this centralized training resource obviously do have sort of fuzzy boundaries, and some things will be repeated between the 2. But these are the 2 things you should think we are improving and we should, you know, work on. As a side note, this may be interesting to some of you. The old system for documentation is was a file called readmeeditors.md or readmeeditors.txt or some such, usually in the source ontology directory. And if there's no other documentation, you may be able to find something in this file as well. But I don't think for any of these ontologies that this will be still necessary. Maybe RO is an exception because it's not ODK migrated, but that's just for you to know. All right, so let's dive then into the process. So what I was thinking is I would like some of you, the ones that I tagged before in the training program, to go and open their terminals and go to the respective ontology directories. And I would, let me see who's here. Maybe if Sean is here. If Sean, yeah, Sean is here. Or maybe, yeah. So I would like to first quickly demonstrate with Sean how a basic release is conducted. But then I would like the rest of you to actually repeat the same thing. And I will also close my windows because there are like a lot of flying around here all the time. Okay, so yeah, Sean, do you want to, would you be able to share screen so that, okay.
Sure.
Okay, so we will go now step by step through the release process. Macroscopically, you should think of it like at least 2, if not 3 phase process. You first run the release pipeline, so that's step number 1, which is what we will show now on Sean. I will stop sharing, which we will show now on Sean's screen. The second step is to make a pull request, run this through GitHub, and merge it into master. And then the last part of this pipeline is to create a proper GitHub release that is tagged. So Sean has opened the cell ontology, and the first thing that he will always, and any of you will always do, is make sure that you're on the master branch, make sure that you have pulled everything from master, and that you're up to date. And yeah, and Sean is clean, is great. And then we go to the yeah, okay, you can also create a branch if you want first. Yep. So he's now creating a branch, which we do for every operation related to ontology. So as I said in other previous meetings, there is only a single thing that is acceptable to be pushed to master, which is like typos on documentation. Everything else should always go through pull request. That means that your first thing should always be create a branch. So he created this branch now. He also already, can you do a PWD one moment just to show where you are? So PWD. Yeah, that's right. So basically, he already, so he, as you can see, the cell ontology, he's in the cell ontology directory, and then he went already into the source and ontology directory. So this is the file where you will also see the run.sh file. So now, as a second check, he was just about to show you. We check whether Docker is running, so you can make like an arbitrary check, or actually update the ODK. That's also good.
Yeah,
that's a good idea. Hopefully you have the latest version. Yeah, that's good. So that's actually a very good point. Thanks, Sean. As you know, ODK has relatively frequent updates, and it's always good to be as up to date with the ODK as possible. So having that kind of Docker pull command sort of at least once per month or so in your list is a good thing. And the documentation should also mention that. Okay, so the next step is to run the release pipeline. So before we actually run it, though, I want to say, so previously we have done, and we have done it so far, and the documentation still reflects this. We have this two major parts in the release pipeline. The one is updating imports, and the other one is generating the release files. Now, this has kind of like has been done like that for ages, and you can still do it like that. But as like a suggestion, I would, for some of you that are getting to, you know, more acquainted with this kind of release parts and will do this more often, is I would kind of suggest to think of these as separate steps, because you don't want what happens, for example, when you run an import is you may import updated upstream terms, for example, that were obsoleted. So your release, let's say Sean runs a, can you run a make and then refresh, let's say refresh minus, yeah, so make refresh minus RO. Yeah. So basically, so he would run he would refresh an import, an upstream import, and what happens is that somehow in this upstream import something was obsoleted, and in CL we have that we use this term. Yeah. So basically, we need to sort and figure out the solution on how, so the release manager then not only has to run the release, but the release manager actually has to go to it first, which means that you are starting to intertwine certain processes like editing the edit file and making releases and so on, which should ideally be separate processes. So what we what I kind of like want to give to you as a suggestion, just click on GitHub, on the GitHub desktop in the background. Yeah, so you can see now that this is what these are the changes. There's nothing bad here that happened, but it could be like a change, like, you know, an obsolete term, a new obsolete term or something like that. But here in this case, everything went well. But think of it a bit like this. Yeah, you don't want two processes. You don't want to have to run a release and think about this whole business of debugging and fixing the upstream or fixing the upstream ontologies and so on. But you want to just get a release out. So what I kind of suggest is for you to plan these two things in sort of separate steps. Refresh the imports in one step, and then run the release as a second step. So now, thankfully for this tutorial, we don't actually have the time to refresh the imports because it takes a while because the files are so big. So what we will do is, anyways, we're going to skip now the generation of imports. So for that,
Nico, can I ask a quick question before you move on?
Sure.
About refreshing the imports? So this is something we would do before we actually do the release. And so the idea is that we import all the latest version, the latest release of whatever ontologies you need and your main ontology that you want to release. And so if there's any obsolete terms or things like that, then you absolutely need to make sure that these are taken care of. Is that right? Because otherwise something is not going to work fine, or something will break.
So basically, there are some kind of ontologies like CL, which we are trying to create more and more strict QC for. And if you were to try and run a, actually, yeah, if you were to try to run a pull, to make a pull request with a in CL, including a release pull request, while having obsolete terms when you import, it wouldn't allow you to merge it. So that's kind of, for these ones, it's so strict. Other ontologies are not that strict, but this is not the only kind of problem. Like obsolete terms is maybe a bit arguable. I personally think obsolete terms should be priority to be fixed, but so they should be fixed before a release, actually, because you don't want to down propagate axioms using obsolete classes anymore. But there are other problems like unsatisfiable classes that are suddenly emerged because your upstream ontologies changed and things like that. So we have this issue right now with Ecto, for example, where an upstream ontology has redefined certain certain chemicals in Cabby in a different part of the hierarchy, which is illegal according to the disjointness axioms that are specified, and because of that we couldn't update this specific import. And that's why kind of, you should think of it kind of like in this kind of two-step way. There are ontology pipelines that are more permissive and they will let you pass, but this doesn't mean that this is a good thing. So I would I would typically, spread these two out and strive for adding as many tests as possible to prevent any kinds of problems like that.
Okay. Thank you.
So noise. So Sean, run sh run.sh and then make. And now, so basically this kind of is the parameter that you should all know about if you're dealing with ODK-based systems. This is the IMP. So it's capital I, capital M. Yeah, exactly. And then, yeah, that's right. So what this is saying here is basically it's a parameter passed to the make file that then will cause all the imports to be skipped. Since we are here in CL, I also want to skip pattern generation because it also changed. Yeah, exactly. Takes time. So I also want to skip PAT equals false.
Right.
No, that's right. And then you write prepare _ release. That's right. And yeah, so this will work now. I think what Sean is doing right now is a good reflex because make has like so make basically maintains a cache. So if files have not changed, in upstream files have not changed, it won't regenerate. It won't regenerate these files. However, this is a bit unfortunate for things like if you want to tag a version or something like that, because make doesn't understand that if you add a version with robot to a file, that the file will actually be changed. So for releases, it's better to always use the -b in the end. And I keep it, I basically use it very often. And what by -b does for make is it defeats the entire purpose of make and disables the cache. So when you do -b, it will actually regenerate everything, every release artifact, every dependency that is specified in the make file. Okay, you can run this now. And we use this time. So basically, okay, let's just look at this for 2 seconds. So if you look at the last 2 lines of output, you will see there is a process that is a robot remove command that takes as an input the edit file, then deletes the imports and does some other things with it. Maybe that was not a good example to explain now, so let's wait for a better one. Yep, so here, that's a good one. So here, this is the definition of the CL full release artifact. It's a big robot command, which first runs, merges the ontology, then runs the reasoner, then runs a few commands called relax, reduce, which we may discuss in the next weeks in the robot tutorials. and then annotates the release file. And this is basically what this will do now. It will go through all of these, and all of these release artifacts that are specified by this prepare release command, and place them in the right place in the repository. And we will look at this in a second. And while Sean is working on that, can I get Sean, can you unshare?
Yeah.
And Sabrina, have you by any chance cloned the RO repository? You're muted.
I know. I think I did, yes.
Okay. Can you navigate in your terminal to the source ontology directory, and the same for maybe for Lauren for Ecto, and the same for who else is here? I mean, Megan will wait a long time, but it's important she does it. So Megan, you may want to do the same in Uberon as well. So remember, pull from master, create a branch, and go to the directory, and then run this command, and we will look at all of you except for Sabrina, which is a slightly different system. And yeah, and just interrupt if you have questions, and you will all get to share your screens in a moment. And yeah, Ray for Peter as well. Okay, so let me also dig up the. So when you're ready, then Sabrina, we can quickly go through RO. Yeah, don't worry. Remember, the goal here is also to train you all in running release pipelines. So Alan, do you have CL cloned on your machine as well?
I do, but I actually need to update that because it's been a while.
Okay, so if you want to go with your Git, do you have ODK installed in Docker?
I do not. So I
Okay, that's all right. Yeah. So I will just ping me afterwards so that I send you the instructions. So I wrote the instructions somewhere before, so it's in the obo training how-tos, but I will send them to you afterwards again so that you can do that, and then we can walk you through that process as well. But it's important that I mean, you will see this video and you can replicate the steps exactly using the video as well. So let me just take a quick look at the. Yeah, there you go. That's what it is. So while Sabrina is cloning and updating, so all of you, obo, the RO repo is not ODK, it's not ODKized, but it is quite similar to ODK. So if you know about the ODK structure, you will be able to find your way around. There's an edit file, there is the run.sh file, and some such as well. The documentation for the release process for RO is in the readme editors.md file, which I've mentioned before, and it's slightly different commands that we will run here. So oh, maybe why are you ready? Okay, then Sabrina, you can share quickly.
I'm sorry, my desktop is a mess.
No problem, no problem. So go to your, you can make it full screen if you don't want anyone, and we can cut the, okay, it's fine. So now in the documentation, it says to go to the source ontology directory, which you already did. I assume you did your, yeah, you did your git pull, I guess, as well.
No,
and if you did,
I mean, yeah, I mean, like, yes, I cloned from master before creating a.
And you already created, you created a new branch. That's great. Okay.
Yeah.
So then you run sh run.sh make all.
Make all one.
Yeah.
Like
yeah, exactly. So make invokes the make file, and all is just a goal specified in this make file. Yeah, you can send it, so you can execute this. And we are not going to wait now here to see what happens. So Sean, is your process ready?
Error 255.
That's perfect.
Guessing
That's great.
there's something. Yeah,
Oh,
I
so-
was going to go.
Yeah, so
I can
shares.
share my screen and
No, that's
give me a
great.
sec, yeah.
That's exactly what we need for the tutorial. For this particular tutorial, this is exactly what we want. Okay.
I mean, I can, yeah. You've showed me how to look at this before.
Okay, this is actually, I know what this problem is, but this is actually by far the most complicated problem to solve. So we will need to do this offline. But let me just give you an overview of like the typical, like this problem can theoretically only happen in CL, and I think in Drosophila anatomy ontology, because no one else is using the OORT toolkit, which is like an old ontology. It's like something like robots, old tools wrapper that was used previously to generate release artifacts. And this is very strict about the nature of the axioms that are allowed or not. This file here, but this error, you will never recognize this again, but we should document this actually.
Is this something that can be updated, like so that this is an error that wouldn't happen due to that older text?
That's a good question. So it needs to be. So I would hope, let's say, that if we do a proper obo validation on the CL edit artifact, that this error wouldn't occur. So what happens here, just so for context, is that there is something. So can you make this a bit bigger, the window? Yeah. So there is something in the there's some, one moment.
Multiple definitions,
Yeah, that's it. So
one term has multiple definitions.
Yeah. So basically yeah, and I know why this happened. Yeah. So basically the problem is RO changed an import, so it changed the definition of a term. Two of your imports import the RO term, but one isn't updated yet. So now it has two definitions on it, and therefore it breaks. So this kind of debugging this, I would like to do this. So fixing this problem, I would like to show you, but not before we finish the normal part of this tutorial. So this is a really complex thing. That's the most complicated thing that can actually happen in this process. There are, however, since we are looking at errors now, there are a few others that can happen. So
Nico, this one quickly, is this something we're going to fix, hopefully with the new plans with Jim for
exactly.
import generation?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so it will be fixed by a completely new system for imports, which is called base files. Yeah, for now, this is not going to happen in the next year. So this kind of problem happens with CL once in a while.
In the next year.
We will see when.
All right. Well, we'll talk like next week, I think. Okay. Bye.
Yeah. Yeah, but in any case, I know so to fix this right now, the way that you would do this, Sean, that's just for you, not for this tutorial, is you would find this multiple definition. So you would go to this RO term in Protege. So you would open Protege, find this definition in there, just delete it from the imports, and then run the release pipeline again, and then it would probably work, or if there's not another error. So in any case, that is not something that anyone here, normal curator, would ever have to deal with. Now there are other kinds of problems that happen, and these ones you will see them, and they will happen quite often. So there's, for example, the most typical error that happens is that the cabby import doesn't work. So you will see some cryptic error message, and then in the last row of the makefile, it will say that something cabby.owl didn't update, and this is because the location of the cabby ontology is a bit flaky, and sometimes it's a bit you know, it takes a few attempts before you download it and it works. So that's another thing that you have. For those that start running, you sometimes get another error, which is due to memory issues. So in this cases, we have some instructions on how to increase memory for this process. And yeah, maybe can you unshare again and go back to, let's see, Ray, how far is your release process gone? We can't hear you, or at least I can't.
Still can't hear you, Ray.
No, we can't hear you. Okay, so while you're looking at your microphone, maybe then, Lauren, what about you?
Okay, so I did sh run.sh make all, and it is still going.
Oh, you have done make all. So basically, okay, that was a bit confusing. Yeah, you should for, oh, Ray, something with your phone, with your noise. So for Ecto, you don't want to run make all, you want to run prepare release.
Okay.
So this IMP equals false and then prepare release.
Okay. So I have to let it keep finish running. Whatever.
You can interrupt it and go to your GitHub desktop. And so basically, can you just share your screen, because it's something that is very typical. I just want to show this to everyone, because if the release breaks, it just happens from time to time. It's one of and you should all be prepared that this happens. So in this case, now just interrupt it. Just go on it and Control C. Yeah. So now go to your GitHub client. Yeah. Oh, actually, it didn't create anything. But if it would have created something in Ecto now, then what you would do is you just discard all the changes to these files, and then you start again. So you go back to your release now, sh run.sh make, then IMP with capital letters with an M, like as for imports, equals false, and with the lowercase false. Sorry, I don't know whether it's
sorry.
no worries. PAT equals false, and then prepare underscore release -b. No, that's it. And you can unshare. Yeah, you can run this, and you can unshare again, and we will look back at this later. So who else?
I think it's done.
Okay, great. Can you share screen again? That looks good. Okay, so how do you know it's done? This takes a bit of experience, but basically, you know it's done when there is no error in the end. In ODK pipelines, we also include now a message in the end that says some files have been successfully copied and the release is finished or something. But in some of the older pipelines like IO, you can be sure that it's done if there's not an error message in the last row. So now, can you show us your GitHub desktop?
Yes, give me a second. Okay.
And we are not, sorry. No,
I don't know. There's nothing here.
Can you run git status in your in there? Are you sure you went to the correct run a git status?
I did, and it was on the branch that I called release tutorial.
Because maybe, yeah. So this is odd that there's no file being created, but run sh run.sh make release. That's the second step in the, yeah, okay. And that's the second step in the RO pipeline. Okay.
Like this? Okay.
Yep, that's right. That should be quick, so we will just wait here. So as you can see, again, the artifacts from the edit files, all the different release artifacts are being built. I think make all maybe is just QC to make sure that nothing is broken. So go back now to GitHub desktop. Yeah, now you see the release artifacts correctly. Great. Okay. Okay. So now this is one of the things that I want to encourage you to do in general for everything, not just for releases. But if you go back to GitHub desktop for a moment, you should, before you even push something, even to GitHub, just use these tools to actually look through the diff a little bit. So go to ro-base.obo. So obo files are great for diffs. In the left there, ro-base.obo as a second file in the list of updated files. Yeah. So you can see nothing has changed except for that the date has changed from, because I just recently did a release. So that's great. If you click on the base.owl file, yeah, it's the same there. And then the big RO file, just, click through all of them. Yeah. Yeah, and you see everything is fine. So that's great. So now what you will do is you will publish first you create a commit. In this commit message, I mean, Sean is amazing with this kind of stuff, so I'm not as diligent, but typically, the commit message, what I do is release and then the date with it. Like today is.
Do you have a special way of writing the date?
Okay. Just write 25th August.
Yeah.
Okay. Now commit. And now, so now you've committed it to branch. Now create a pull request. Yeah. Now you create the pull request. So here it's already a good idea. So this, again, people like Sean and some others, but not me. And so Nicole does it very well as well. Do not merge anything right now. They provide as part of the release the change log that they would also put in the description of the release in the next step. So you have things like added this and that term, changed this and that definition. So if there are not too many changes, you can even kind of manually write up a change log just by looking at the diff. So if you look, we've looked at the diff before, but you can see it again at files changed if you want. Now, the next step for all of these public ontologies that we are working with is to get at least one, but ideally 2 reviews from people. And here the expertise is OWL expertise. So it's not so important. Like, so you maybe even have like one reviewer that can understand the terms that were added to make sure, this is how I added them and this makes sense. But then there should be at least one reviewer for a release that knows OWL and OBO so that they can check whether something weird went wrong with the release process. So in this case, Sabrina, you would add me, and so you can all add me for reviewing release pull requests always. So I don't really care about that. I can do this real quick, but you can also add David, but you don't need to add him now because it's probably redundant to have David and me reviewing it together. But if there is like terms added from a specific person, like let's say there are many brain data standards or many lung map terms in this release, then you would want to add that the person or tag the person that actually created these terms to take a quick look at this. Okay, now let's assume I made a positive review. Now you can merge this pull request. This is safe now because we've already done the review. There's no changes at all, so we don't really care. No one else should do that for any of the tutorials. But since we have no changes here, we are just going ahead because I want to show you the rest of the pipeline as well. Yeah, go ahead.
confirm.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, and delete branch. Okay, now so now we have updated the release on master, and now the last step for all of the ontologies we work with is to create a GitHub release. So the way that this works is you go to click on code, click on releases, and on the right, very far to the right, and down, more down. Yep, that's it. And now click on draft a new release. And then, so this is kind of the important part. The tag version must be always exactly the version that your ontologies are tagged with, not today. So it's that people sometimes run a pipeline the night before and they come the next day and then they create a release. So you will want to go double check in your, for example, in your GitHub desktop, you can quickly check which is the, if you click on history, in the GitHub desktop, there's changes and there's history.
Okay.
And then you can see, click on the release 25 commit that you made, and then you can see just click on the base.obo or whatever, and then you can see this is the release date, so you can copy the release date from there. Okay, and then go back to the release, and then the tag version is always a lowercase v. So in the you can paste it there as well, but but the important thing is this, the tag version there. Yeah. So you make a lowercase v, and then you paste the date. And now you can write a release title, which is you can paste the date again and write release, for example. Yeah. Okay, and in the description now we typically write a more detailed description about which terms were added and stuff like that. So you can add a changelog in there. You should look at how Sean does it for some of his ontologies, very nice. And then, but in here you can write no changes. Okay, and now you can hit publish release. And now you have successfully created a new a new RO release that in a few minutes will be the new release that everyone will import when they are importing RO. So now this doesn't have any changes, so it doesn't do any damage, but it's just something, yeah. So due to the obo Perl system, which we don't have time to discuss now, the Perl, so this perl.obolibrary.org/obo/ro.owl, so the persistent identifier of the of RO is redirected to this tag here, to the v20210825. And so if someone were to look for the specific file, they would go to the GitHub would redirect to this tag, and then the files that were active while at the time when this tag was created. So yeah, so that's kind of like the pipeline of creating a release. Please, unfortunately, let me just take a quick look at the calendar, because yeah, I just wanted to mention two more things before we do some questions. So yeah, so one thing you can do, can someone, maybe Sean, can you just share your screen one moment? I just want, so there's one thing that that sometimes what happens is that a specific import is broken, and it's continuously broken, so you can't really, you just want to skip it almost permanently, or at least for some time. So one way to did it actually work, this fix? Great.
No,
it
didn't. I was just re-importing. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole thing with RO duplicate things and all. I'll go look at it later.
Okay, great. Yeah, so can you go to your can you type in the terminal open space dot? Yeah, and enter, and then open the cl.make file.
Is that?
Yeah, so now what you can do here is if you have like a very annoying, so for example, you can see this in row 7 here, or actually row 11 as well. If you were to uncomment this. Yeah. So basically what you're doing here is you're saying, I'm redefining the goal for the pro import, for the Protein ontology import, and I just skip it. I'm not even trying to make it, so it will not update the pro import indefinitely. Now, it's something you need to be very careful to do, but it's a tool that I sometimes use and other people sometimes use for if there is like an import that persistently doesn't fix, like let's say the cabby network is so broken, you just don't want to be annoyed. You can add this command there, add this override and skip updates until the issue is fixed. You just need to kind of remember that you have to uncomment this again. So that's why it's probably very important that you always have assigned reviewers to your pull request, because we will see if you do such a thing and we will not allow you to commit this to master. But if you do this just locally, it's a good tool to skip broken imports. All right, unfortunately, we are at the hour, but I want to give you a chance to ask questions. Maybe if we overrun like 2-3 minutes, it's, I guess, okay. Again, the goal for this meeting is that you all of you will be able to run the releases for all of these ontologies if they need to. So there should not be any doubt for any of you that if you need, let's say, if Lauren, you need an Uberon release, you should be able to clone Uberon and go through this pipeline and make a pull request exactly as if you were to do an Ecto release, in the same way as if you were to do a Pato release. So all of you, it would be really great if you could go and try to make these pull requests at least, to make sure that this knowledge gets spread a little bit around. And I will circulate the video so that you can see exactly the steps again. And you, Sean, it would be amazing if when we are debugging this OR thing, because it happens every 6 months, I have to go through this pain. If we can just write a 10-step process of how to deal with it when we hit it, because it's just annoying. We should actually get rid of the OR dependency, but at the moment we can't. Anyways, no more questions?
Sure.
Okay, then.
This is super helpful, Nico. Thank you.
No worries.
Yes, River.
Thank you.
No problem. And Alan, I would really encourage you to try, especially for any ontology that you want. You can do it for CL if you have editor's rights. You can't really break anything. If you break something, I will fix it. But generally, the only rule in this world, if you forget everything else, do not commit to master. The holy rule. If you don't do that, nothing bad can happen.
Yeah.
Okay, so good luck. All of you try. Assign me as reviewers to your pull request. If you can't assign, tag me in the body of the pull request. Each of you should do at least 1, if not 2, releases of some ontologies randomly around, and be super comfortable and super confident you can all do it, and there is no magic involved in it. And yeah, don't worry about anything, just trust the process. So see you later, and have a good for rest of the week, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Nico.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks, Nico.
You.